I need to tell you about the day my mother tried to steal my wedding, and how my husband made sure she couldn't get away with something else she'd already stolen first. My name is Claire Whitfield, I'm 29, and even now, months later, I can still feel the cold of that marble floor under my heels, the second everything fell apart. I'd spent almost a year and a half building that day, piece by piece. The champagne silk dress I'd fitted 3 times. The little calligraphed place cards I stayed up until midnight writing myself. The song my fiancé Marcus and I picked after 4 separate arguments about our first dance. Every detail mattered, because I'd been imagining this exact day since I was 7 years old, sketching brides in the margins of my homework at my grandmother's dining table. My mother, Diane, sat across from me at that same table more times than I could count over the years. She watched me dream this wedding into existence. Which is exactly why what she did that morning still doesn't feel real to me, even now. She showed up at the Ashford Chapel, in white. Not blush. Not champagne. Not some pale shade she could later claim was basically neutral. A full, structured, floor-length white gown, with a lace hem that looked suspiciously, deliberately, close to mine. I was upstairs getting ready when my best friend Priya pushed the door open, with an expression I had genuinely never seen on her face before. Priya jokes through everything, even bad news, even funerals. She wasn't joking now. She just said, "Claire, your mom's downstairs. And you need to sit down before I say the rest." I told her to just tell me. She said Diane was wearing white, or close enough that no one in that building was going to be able to tell the difference from more than 10 feet away. I felt my stomach drop straight through the floor. My first instinct was to march downstairs and confront her, right there. Marcus's mother, Elaine, stepped in front of the door before I could move, and held both my hands still. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "Not now. Not today. You are walking down that aisle, and we handle this after." So I did exactly that. I walked down the aisle on legs that would barely hold me, in front of 280 guests, while somewhere in that crowd, my mother leaned towards strangers and murmured, just loud enough to be overheard, "It's Ivory, sweetheart." Totally different tone than hers. As if anyone had asked. As if saying it made it true. The ceremony itself was gorgeous, in spite of her best efforts to ruin it. Marcus teared up the second he saw me, and that moment was mine, untouchable, real. But the reception, that's where the whole night actually came apart at the seams. We just stepped onto the dance floor for our first song, his hand settling on my waist, the first few piano notes starting to play, when the music abruptly cut out. And then my mother's voice rang out over the microphone, bright and performative, like she was the one getting married. "Good evening, everyone. I have a little surprise for the happy couple." The entire room went quiet. Every head turned toward her. I turned to Marcus instead, and he leaned down close to my ear, steady as concrete, and said, "Don't look at her. Look at the wall behind her." So I looked at the wall. And that's when I understood exactly what he'd done. Marcus had known, for almost a week, what my mother had done with the money my grandmother Eleanor left me in her will. Nearly $60,000, quietly redirected into my mother's account almost 3 years earlier, without my knowledge or consent. Spent on a remodeled kitchen, a Mediterranean cruise, and a long list of things I still don't have a full accounting of. Marcus had found the bank statements. He'd hired a lawyer. And on the back wall of my own wedding reception, lit up in clean projected letters that looked like tasteful string light decor from across the room, was the evidence. Transfer dates, dollar amounts, and my grandmother's name at the top of every single document. 280 people turned around, almost in unison. My mother was still holding that microphone. The silence that followed had a physical weight to it, nothing like the anticipation before a beautiful moment. It was the silence of a room realizing, in real time, that they were witnessing something they were never supposed to see. I watched it ripple outward. The guests nearest the wall understood first. Then the middle rows started turning and whispering. Then, finally, the people standing closest to my mother turned too, one after another, until almost the entire reception hall was facing away from Diane Whitfield, and toward the truth projected in black and white behind her. She was still holding the microphone in her white dress, that carefully chosen, unmistakably white dress, with absolutely nothing left to say into it. I watched her face cycle through about 4 different expressions in the span of a few seconds. Confusion, then recognition, then something that wasn't quite guilt, but sat right next to it, the look of someone deciding, in real time, whether to run or to perform her way out. She picked performance. She laughed, that same practiced laugh she always used to steer a room away from her, and said into the mic, "Well, I'm not sure what that's about, but it certainly wasn't the surprise I had in mind." A few people near her smiled awkwardly. Almost nobody else did. Marcus's hand tightened around mine. He'd planned every second of that moment with the same calm precision he brings to everything he does. He'd talked to Priya. He'd talked to the venue manager. The banner had been folded and hidden behind a drape all evening, rigged to drop the moment my mother reached for a microphone to make my wedding about herself, for the second time in one day. He hadn't told me beforehand, because he knew exactly what I would have said. I would have called it too much, too public, too harsh even for her. I would have found a way to protect her, again, the way I'd spent my whole life absorbing her behavior and making excuses for it to anyone who asked, because she was my mother, and that's simply what I'd always done. He decided, quietly and completely on his own, that this time, somebody was finally going to protect me instead. I didn't cry. I want to be honest about that part. I'd already cried more tears over Diane Whitfield than I could count, in bathroom stalls, in parking lots, on 2 a.m. phone calls with Priya that turned into something closer to grief. I wasn't about to give her that in front of everyone, standing there in my wedding dress. What I felt instead was something quieter than tears, and stranger too. It was the relief of something becoming permanent. Of a truth that had lived silently inside me for 3 years, suddenly existing outside of my own head, visible, documented, witnessed by everyone in that room. My Uncle Theo was the first person to stand. He crossed the entire reception hall, gently took the microphone out of my mother's hand, set it down on the nearest table, and turned to the DJ. "Play the song," he said, simple as that. And the DJ did. Marcus pulled me back onto the dance floor, and we finished our first dance while my mother stood frozen at the edge of the room in her white dress, not knowing what to do with her hands, or her face, or any of it. She left before we cut the cake. She's called me 6 times since that night. I haven't picked up once. My lawyer has, on my behalf. The process of recovering my grandmother's inheritance is moving forward, and I've been told the paperwork Marcus put together gives us a strong chance of success. My grandmother Eleanor left that money for me on purpose, out of love, and I intend to honor that by fighting for every cent of it, without a single apology. I married a man who watched the person who was supposed to protect me fail at it for 29 straight years. And then, without asking for a thank you or a single ounce of credit, quietly fixed it himself, on the most public day of our entire lives, in a room full of witnesses, while I stared at a back wall and finally understood what it actually feels like to be chosen. That's the whole truth, exactly as it happened. If this story hit you somewhere real, or reminded you of someone who fought hard just to be believed, I'd love for you to stick around and subscribe. Stories like this one only keep going because people like you keep showing up for them. So hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay close. There's a lot more where this came from.